Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the world's best investing podcast. Today, I want to talk about why I think that HIMS and Duolingo are trillion-dollar companies in the making. You see, value creation processes tend to start slow, and then via the nature, the wonder of compounding, things get very fast. Things accelerate a lot, and HIMS and Duolingo are nearing an inflection point. HIMS specifically is on a path to bring a level of healthcare at a cost that is unprecedented in human history. A lot of this has to do with peptides, but peptides will just only be a fraction of what's offered on the platform going forward. There are many, many things coming in medicine which would absolutely blow your mind. And HIMS is, I would say, around a year or a year and a half away from abstracting away all the complexity and inconvenience in the healthcare experience for customers. Once that happens, what's going to happen is that HIMS will be free to scale on the digital plane at hyperspeed. We've seen that happen with Amazon. Once Amazon got their stuff together and their logistics, once they achieved a certain threshold of efficiency, the company just exploded to the upside. This is a very common theme. It's essentially the Costco algorithm applied to network effects. And so what I think we're going to see is HIMS go through a Palantir kind of inflection point. As I said, a year or a year and a half away from now. And that is similar in nature to Duolingo, except that Duolingo doesn't have a physical component and it doesn't have much legal risk associated with it, which HIMS does. As I've said many times, the whole GLP-1 thing, I think everyone is underestimating, both to the upside and to the downside, frankly, because GLP-1s are just a subset of a much broader library of peptides, which I think are the future of healthcare. And just the level of disruption that's going to happen is tremendous. Recently, I've shifted more. Actually, I would say I've been pretty much bullish on the pharmaceutical sector the whole time, just because I think that via the onset of longitudinal medicine, which is what HIMS essentially is, we're going to have so much more data about people and about health and about what actually makes people healthy and what doesn't. So pharma is going to have such a vast treasure trove of insights to create drugs that really do wonderful things for us. If you think about it in the abstract, where we are in, a hypothetical, if we were to look back at our present time in 300 years time, people would think we lived probably in the most troublesome, disastrous era. Really, because humans are, terminal illness is really always lurking. This is really the defining feature of the human condition at present. So really, there is such a long way to go to solve that problem. And I think that therefore HIMS and everyone around HIMS has such vast upside going forward, because it really is what's going to unlock that next generation of healthcare is the insights, and it's the longitudinal data. Right now, you have massive pharma companies, but they are building drugs pretty much blindfolded. It's a kind of trial and error process, and it's highly inefficient. This is going to change. I think longevity and optimal health is really going to come to every single human on the planet over the next decade or two, and I think it's going to be tremendously exciting to watch and potentially quite lucrative for him, shareholders, and a bunch of other companies as well, of course. Now, I always like to go back to the concept of a singularity scaler, which is a company that is actually at present increasing its earning power in tandem with the evolution of AI scaling laws. As we add more parameters to models, they get smarter. We have a bunch of new scaling laws at present. The explosion, the Cambrian explosion that we're going to see over the next year or two is going to be the agentic economy, which is when you have agents talking to each other and doing things. Why am I talking about the whole physical component for HIMS? Because, as I said, once that gets abstracted away in relative terms, and actually, you will think that's strange. You will think it's too early to talk about that. But Andrew Dudden, HIMS' CEO, during the last earnings call, really pointed to the idea of franchising, a repeatable manufacturing and logistics model like we've seen Tesla and we've seen Amazon do. You can go and review my write-up that I did on the last HIMS earnings report, and you will see that I quote that specific part because I thought it was so interesting. And that is, I think that analysts are constantly missing the point. At least the ones you hear about, with the B of A price targets, etc. That is such an important thing. That means that HIM's management has identified a blueprint which they believe is repeatable, and that is why they are now talking about expanding internationally, etc. Incidentally, before we move on to the singularity scalar thing, which will link these ideas that I'm talking about for Duolingo, there's recently been questions about why HIMS wants to scale internationally. Firstly, a lot of the bearish arguments for this company come down to who do you think is more competent? Is the management team more competent, or is the person that you're seeing on the internet that has an opinion more competent? To date, it's always been the case that HIMS management is more competent. What they excel at is identifying pain points in the healthcare space and fixing them at a gradually lower real cost over time. And so that is applicable to markets worldwide. The US is a particularly inefficient healthcare market because it's a monopsony, in that there is only one buyer, which is the insurance companies, and therefore prices just get jacked up every single day. In Europe, it's different. In Europe, you have a socialized healthcare system, which has many benefits, but it's also incredibly slow and inefficient. And so what Europeans want is solutions now. So the pain point they have is that they want to get fixed is slowness. They want speed. And in Asia, it will be different. But generally, healthcare is the biggest pain point for any human on Earth. And as I said, I believe, it sounds a little bit ominous, but it's, the defining condition, the defining feature of the human condition is just terminal illness always lurking. So, of course, there is a massive pain point to be solved everywhere. Okay. So now, why do I think that this is a $1 trillion company in the making? Just, by the nature of what I just explained. I think execution is extraordinary. They have a repeatable blueprint now. This is really going to become something like Spotify for healthcare. They will be the data faucet for everyone else, the source of longitudinal healthcare data. And that is going to lead to a Cambrian explosion in healthcare outcomes per dollar spent for humans worldwide. Now, as I was saying, Duolingo is the same, except that it doesn't have the physical restrictions and it doesn't have the legal risk. One is not the same as the other, in that the fact that HIMS has physical constraints doesn't make it an inferior thesis. It's actually an added element to the moat. It's a lot like Amazon. If Amazon were only digital, you could argue that it would actually be easier to disrupt than it is at present. I believe that actually of the biggest companies on earth, Amazon is perhaps the most undisruptible one. And that is because of the physical component. I think it's going to be very hard. It is already very hard to replicate HIMS's vertically integrated infrastructure. And you could argue with me back and forth, but you can't argue with free cash flow per share rising exponentially. That is the result of bringing in exponentially more revenue in a defensible manner. So it's interesting, however, that by Duolingo, not having a physical component, it can scale a lot faster. And so this morning I was reviewing the Q2 2025 earnings report for Duolingo, and I found it fascinating that in just over, the chess vertical was released in May, and it's now grown to over 1 million daily active users. And what's really interesting that I pointed out in my last Duolingo earnings digest is that this vertical was created by two individuals with no knowledge of chess and no knowledge of coding, which is really incredible. So that the first prototype was created by them, and then once that sort of gained some kind of validation, then the rest of the team took over naturally. What that actually shows you is that Duolingo's value creation process is accelerating exponentially. We talked about this in the last Spotify earnings digest. It's subtle. Look, if you look across the board in technology, a lot of the companies are beating earnings guidance. That's because what we are seeing is an acceleration across the board in value creation processes. This is so different to 2001 in that the internet wasn't necessarily accretive to many businesses that the market was really chasing back then. And so you had a great disconnect between valuations and fundamentals. What you have now is a technology that is really enhancing humanity's ability to create value in a way that we haven't seen to date. It's hard to comprehend as a human. It's exponentially better every day that we wake up. This is really happening. Singularity scalars are real. The best example of that, as I was saying, is the chess vertical. And going back to the Spotify thing, Spotify is now adding an agentic layer on top of its old backhand. And what that is going to enable them to do is to speak code into existence and hence features. If you think about Duolingo, HIMS, and Spotify, removing the physical component for HIMS, which we discussed, they are in essence the same thing. what they are doing is optimizing the user experience in order to enhance lifetime value over time. And really, in practical terms, all that translates into is different pixels on the screen. That is really what it is. If you think about the value chain that goes into that, it's really just humans processing information, taking feedback, excuse me, from the market, and then figuring out what iterations to make on the in terms of user experience in order to see whether that increases lifetime value or not. That's essentially what's happening. That stack can be compressed into an agent, essentially. So it's very bullish to see Spotify doing that. Different companies have different ways of approaching that. Duolingo is doing it slightly differently, but in essence, these three companies, and generally any other company that's applying the Costco algorithm to network effects, is essentially doing the same. So what we have is an acceleration across the board. And so long as the AI scaling laws persist, we're going to see something which is very counterintuitive, which is we're going to see these companies that are valued today at somewhere between $10 billion to 200, 300. They're going to become trillion-dollar companies in a much shorter period of time than people believe. And it really just comes down to value creation processes. It's very counterintuitive. You see, meanwhile, the rest of the financial industry kind of focused on quarter over quarter performance, which is fine. Someone has to do it. And it does actually provide some value to the rest of us. But if you think about this on a first principles basis, we are seeing an acceleration that we haven't seen. These two businesses, I mean, Spotify, you guys know it's relatively baked in for me. I'm up something like sevenfold now on my original investment. It's actually returned my entire portfolio more than once now, same as Palantir. So I'm very, very long optionality right now. I still believe that has tremendous upside, but Hims and Duolingo are different in that they are smaller. They are essentially mini Spotify's, but they're going to do what Spotify has done in a much shorter period of time, just by nature of the environment we live in now, and by nature of the accelerating value creation processes. Now, with the whole agentic economy, Hims talked about this too. Andrew Dudem talked about how they are thinking about you as a customer having an AI agent with you 24/7 that acts as a doctor. So if you think about what's actually going to happen there, I mean, the thing with the peptides, you can argue with me back and forth, but we had some prominent voices talking about it this weekend, and I think everyone kind of had a little bit of an aha moment. That was Andrew Huberman. He said, peptides are big, they are coming, and then he confirmed someone is working with the FDA to get them approved quickly. Thing with the FDA and peptides, it's not actually a straightforward story. Peptides are not coming out of the blue. It's not your usual kind of process to get them approved. It's different. I'm not going to use the exact terms that I have in mind, but a lot of you, I mean, if you know, it's different. And they can get approved relatively quickly with the right admin, which we have at the moment. And so I think it can be quite a binary and sudden thing. But if you think about the infrastructure, the whole agentic thing, 24/7, with these molecules delivered to your doorstep, and then you have the testing kit at home, etc. It's a healthcare platform like we haven't seen yet, because actually the agent won't only provide value to you in terms of the actual outcomes as a patient. It's going to be optimizing the UX, and it's going to be learning about every single interaction with every single customer. So really, the escape velocity that Hims is looking at it very much fits my framework of singularity scalars. And I think that people are not really wrapping their head around this. But when I said that Hims is going to be, I think it's the intrinsic value is going to be broadly $2,000 per share in around 5 years' time. It's because, as I was saying, once you abstract away the physical component, the time required to go from an agent that kind of improves patient outcomes a little bit to an agent that performs at a level that 99.9% of doctors can't without having to eat, sleep, or rest or complain, and simultaneously optimize the user experience just to make everything exponentially easier, etc. is very short. If AI does what it does today, just imagine what it's going to be doing in a year and a half or 2 years from now. We are going to be living in a radically different world, and I think that people quite don't understand this yet. It just so happens that these two companies, and I'm sure a bunch of other ones, like I looked at Sata a few weeks ago and I liked it, but the background of the CEO, I'm not really in love with that, although I have nothing bad to say per se. But it's these two companies have extraordinary management. They have platforms that are growing at lightning speed. They are obsessed with the end customer. They are perfectly running the Costco algorithm, and they are just set up for a tipping inflection point. Like, we haven't seen this in business yet. This is going to be truly extraordinary. So while I think that people could be impressed by the price action of Duolingo and HIMS over the past few years, I think it's going to get a lot more intense. And the main problem to be solved in the markets going forward is going to be people wrapping their heads around singularity scalars and whether they do exist in the first place, and then after that, how to price them. So we've seen with Palantir, which I will discuss in my next video, how the knee-jerk reaction for someone is to say that that's just overvalued. And then the company just keeps outperforming. It's growing tremendously. It's expanding margins. Meanwhile, it's a pristine example of a singularity scalar. It's extremely counterintuitive. It's confusing, but then it just keeps on performing. It doesn't mean that it can't drop 50% overnight, like it's actually done recently in April. And HIMS does this all the time. But price action is not fundamentals. For a price, stock prices do track free cash flow per share over the long term. And what's happening with singularity scalars is that they are exponentiating their earning power. Revenue is rising exponentially, margins are going up, or at least stable. And so what these companies are doing is just bringing in exponentially more money at a marginal cost. So the main problem is going to be people wrapping their heads around that. HIMS is not quite there yet. The problem people are dealing with is this a GLP-1 company or what? As I said, this weekend, we had a kind of aha moment. Now, suddenly, everyone that's talking about HIMS is talking about peptides. You guys know I know about peptides because of my personal experience. Nothing I say is medical advice, and it doesn't mean you should do anything or any of that. It worked for me because I had a risk-reward scenario that was favorable. So I took an asymmetric decision. And actually, the mental process behind that is exactly the same mental process behind my picks. And the decision to do what I've done over the past year has created enormous additional wealth for me in terms of health. I've talked about this already. But we had an aha moment, and I think that I don't think the market yet understands that singularity scalars are in fact real, and that they can't be priced, actually, because I mean, the ups and downs of the market are never going to disappear. I think that the psychological turmoil in the markets is going to be a defining feature forever because it's just going to be humans involved. And machines probably extrapolating human emotions. That's what we have right now. But it's about whether the deal is thick enough or not. It always has been the case that if you have to do a valuation down to whatever kind of precision you want to do it, the deal is too thin. You're not going to make money. You have to buy something that you believe is highly likely to be worth exponentially more, say 5 or 10 years down the line. That single equation is going to prevail. It's actually the only equation, in my opinion, that's going to prevail when dealing with singularity scalars. So, we've talked many times about DCFs and how people do valuations and they never work. That is because they are linear and they imply linear thinking. And you can't really embed exponential assumptions into a DCF because almost always, companies of this sort go in directions that you don't expect them to. What you need to have is a qualitative understanding of how extraordinary the organization in question is, and therefore how likely is it that they execute on their current roadmap, which you have a specific and unique understanding of, which the market doesn't have. That is the recipe for success. That is how you deal with singularity scalars. So Duolingo, I got into it at something like $320 per share. So the investment hasn't really paid much dividends yet. HIMS, I'm up something like 4x right now. Even with the whole turmoil about GLP-1, the Novo Nordisk press release saying they had sued a bunch of companies, etc., the company is still right up there, both fundamentals and the share price. Just some thoughts to cap off with HIMS. It comes down, as I was saying, to who is more competent, the management team or the random guys online. I'm not saying people sharing their opinions on HIMS are not useful. I appreciate them. I appreciate everyone's opinion. But ultimately, I think that HIMS management is exponentially more capable than really anyone I've come across in the healthcare space. So guys, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you had a great time. Thank you very much again for joining me. Could you please share this with someone else if you enjoyed this update? These deep dives and updates are for free, and so the only way this grows is with your help. So thank you very much in advance. Take care, and until next time.